Friends, today we are going to speak about the making of India's foreign policy. Foreign policy is a very complex subject, and there are a large number of players, a large number of stakeholders who are involved in creating the foreign policy of any country. As far as India is concerned, let us first very quickly look at what are the broad objectives that India's foreign policy is required to achieve and required to serve. First of all, promote national interest, and of course we have to determine what national interest is. Some of aspects of this national interest are keeping the borders secure, protecting the sovereignty and national integrity of our country. We know that we have about 3,500 kilometer border with China. We've just had a conflict there. We also have an unsettled border with Pakistan. There's line of control. So keeping all that secure is very important. It's a part of the responsibility of the Ministry of Defense, but also Ministry of External Affairs has a very important role to play. It also, the foreign policy of India also seeks to promote economic development and growth of the country. It seeks to support and promote the domestic transformation. What is the domestic transformation? Removal of poverty, providing a decent standard of living for the people, providing better infrastructure, better trading, providing jobs. All this is sought to be achieved also through the foreign policy, and all this needs to be achieved while protecting our ethos of pluralism, of democracy, justice, fair play, maintaining freedoms. We also need to have a cooperative and supportive external environment. That means all our neighbors have good relations with them. Also maintain positive and harmonious relations with foreign partners, those who might not be our neighbors. We have an extended neighborhood in Central Asia. We have an extended neighborhood in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN countries. Having good relations with them is also very important. Then ensuring that we maintain international peace, security, protect human rights, promote human rights, not only in our country, but the whole world. And then last but not the least, protect the interest of Indian diaspora. We have about 25 to 30 million of our people who are outside the country, and their interests also need to be protected. Let me give some general remarks. One is, as we have seen just now, the foreign policy and the domestic policies are very closely interlinked. We've seen promoting the economy of the country, that is a domestic policy, promoting industrialization, promoting the well-being of our citizens. All these are domestic policies, and foreign policy has an important role to play in it. In terms of formulation of foreign policy, we must recognize it's a very complex issue because there are a large number of players, there are a large number of stakeholders that are involved. It's also a very dynamic process. We of course know that foreign policy depends upon the geography of a country, upon the history of a country, but most of all it depends also in the global, on the global relations. What is the global dynamics? What is the global situation? And that can change. Just to give you an example, in 1971, when India was had the fight with Pakistan for the liberation of Bangladesh, at that time India and the United States were at loggerheads with each other. They did not have, the relations were very much down in the nadir. They didn't have very positive relations. Today, the United States is one of the most significant and important partners of India. This is how the global dynamics has changed, because China has surfaced as an important player, as a significant player, and China as a threat. Its aggressiveness is a threat not only to India, but also to the United States and to the world. So where the interests coincide, where the interests combine, so our foreign policy is also related, foreign policy is also affected in that way. There are, as I said, a large number of institutions and individuals who have a role to play. No single institution or individual will have the final say in this. They will all make contributions, and whatever they their point of view is, whatever their interests are, whatever their position is, all that will be taken into account while deciding on the final, ultimate foreign policy that India pursues. It's a dynamic process. It is not a static process. It will keep on changing as things in our neighborhood and in the world change. It is also needs to be recognized that formulation of the foreign policy and implementation of the foreign policy, it falls under the jurisdiction of the center, of the federal government in Delhi. States in the 29 states that we have in India, they do not have a role to play. But still, states which are neighboring some of the countries which are in a neighborhood, they have a very important role to play. For instance, if we are talking about relations with Bangladesh, then West Bengal will have an important role to play. Tripura will have an important role to play. Assam will have an important role to play because they are neighboring countries. If we are talking about our relations with Myanmar, where we have seen emergency being declared, a coup being declared, the 4 neighboring states of Mizoram, Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh and Nagaland, they will have an important say in whatever our the relations with these countries are. If it is Sri Lanka, then of course Tamil Nadu has a very important role to play. When we are talking about the position of NRIs, non-resident Indians, or people of Indian origin who have settled outside the country, in that case Kerala and Andhra Pradesh, from where many of these people go out, they will have a point of view which will need to be taken into account. The Ministry of External Affairs has some years ago launched what are called the public diplomacy lectures or talks, so that the experts in these areas, they will go to different states, they will go to different universities, they will go to different institutions, they will even go to and address different NGOs and speak about the various issues on foreign policy, whether it is relations with the United States, with China, with Pakistan, with Russia, so that our younger citizenry, our young people who are going to be the decision makers and policy makers of tomorrow, that they have a good understanding and they are well informed when discussions on foreign policy take place in the country. If we look at the most important institution or the most important architect of India's foreign policy, that I would say is the Prime Minister of India. Not only the current Prime Minister of India, although he has had a huge role to play in taking forward the foreign policy formulation and implementation, but all former Prime Ministers of the country have had a very important role to play. In fact, they are the Prime Minister is the most important and the most significant architect of India's foreign policy. If we were to look at the current Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, who's been in power since May 2014, there are a large number of achievements, a large number of successes that could be attributed to the policy that has been followed over the last so many years. I think whether it is the neighborhood first policy, in which we see that our relations with all our neighbors over the last 6.5 years have improved very significantly, or we have the Act East policy, in which we have reached out to the not only to the ASEAN countries in southeast of India, but also reached much further from there in terms of improving relations with Australia, with Japan, with the Pacific island nations like Fiji and all the other island states in that region, with the Republic of Korea, so that the Act East policy has been a great success. I think the biggest success has been the improvement of relations with the United States. because United States has become the most significant and the most important foreign policy partner as far as India is concerned. With Africa, we have started the Africa Forum summits, which are also doing extremely well. So the Prime Minister has had a very important role to play in taking our foreign policy forward. Just to look at some of the other in the previous years, but we need to recognize that in democracies where there are popularly elected governments, the chief executives are usually the final arbiters of the country's foreign policy, because there will be pressure points, there will be different interests that will be promoted, that will be sought to be taken forward. But ultimately, it is the chief executive, the Prime Minister in the case of India. As far as the other democracies are concerned, I have mentioned it in the US presidents. We can see that George W. Bush, he started the global war on terror. Donald Trump, he went back from all the commitments that his predecessor Barack Obama had made. For instance, the Iranian nuclear deal, he went back from that. In terms of relations with NATO, relations with the European Union, relations with China, Donald Trump moved very strongly away from what his predecessor had done. Similarly, French presidents, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, she has had a very strong imprint on the foreign policy of her country. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison recently, the pushback against China can be attributed to the foreign policy that has been advanced by the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison. South Korean President Moon Jae-in, the current incumbent, he has been very active in taking forward the foreign policy. And Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was the last Prime Minister, in taking the relationship with India forward. And also the United States, Australia and Japan, we have started the Quad grouping, which is a very significant new addition as far as the architecture in the Indo-Pacific is concerned. As far as India is concerned, all our former Prime Ministers, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he had a strong imprint in terms of maintaining relations with China. We are aware that Sardar Patel was not very supportive of having strong relations with China, but it is Pandit Nehru who had promoted the policy of fraternal relations, and that unfortunately led to the 1962 war. Indira Gandhi was instrumental for one of the biggest successes that India has had in its foreign policy since its independence. That is the 1971 war with Pakistan, when Bangladesh emerged as a free country. Mr. Gujral, he gave the Gujral Doctrine. That means India, being the large country, needs to be much more forthcoming and provide much greater, should not insist on reciprocity as far as its relations with its neighbors are concerned. P.V. Narasimha Rao, he established relations with Israel in 1992. He also launched the Look East policy. As far as Mr. Vajpayee is concerned, he established summit partnerships with a number of countries, with Russia, with ASEAN, with European Union. Also, he took the bus to Lahore and strengthened the outreach to Pakistan. So the point here is that all chief executives, all prime ministers have played a very significant role in forming and in making the foreign policy of the country. Of course, the Ministry of External Affairs is a pivotal player, and it acts really as a secretariat for all issues related to the foreign policy. It is headed by Dr. S. Jaishankar, who was a Foreign Service officer, who is a professional, who is an expert. The Foreign Secretary, there is one Foreign Secretary and there are 3 secretaries. There are a large number of territorial divisions which deal with different territories of the world. There are also functional divisions which deal with different issues like United Nations, like protocol, like finance, like administration, like development partnership. Recently, we have added a number of new divisions because the world is changing and the challenges that the country has to face, those also change. So issues of counter-terrorism, cyber diplomacy, e-governance, even Indo-Pacific has been added as a separate division very recently. India has 89 embassies and high commissions in different countries, and we have 108 consulates. Embassies and high commissions are located in the capitals of different countries, while the consulates are located in other major cities. Like in the United States, we have the embassy in Washington, D.C. We have consulates in San Francisco, in Houston, in Chicago, in New York. We also have permanent missions to the United Nations in New York, Geneva, Paris. These are the three major cities where the UN offices are located. And they provide feedback to the ministry from these countries. Our ambassadors and our officers who are posted there will provide feedback to tell us what is happening and how relations with those countries can be further expanded and further promoted. There are other significant players which shape the foreign policy of India. For instance, the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. At the present, it is Mr. Ajit Doval. But before that, this institution was in fact established in 1998 after the Kargil war and the Kargil conflict and the Pokhran nuclear test, the second nuclear test that took place in May 1998. Before that, the earlier national security advisors have been Brijesh Mishra, Jain Dikshit, M.K. Narayanan, Shiv Shankar Menon. All of them, their most important feature is that they are very close to the Prime Minister. They have a direct link to the Prime Minister. So as I said, the Prime Minister is the final authority. And if the National Security Advisor, the NSA, if they have the ear of the Prime Minister, then of course they are able to play a very important role. Very recently, we have appointed 3 Deputy National Security Advisors, and they have their own different areas of specialization. One is intelligence, one is foreign policy, and they feed in their views to the National Security Advisor. There is also the National Security Council Secretariat, and this was also established along with the Office of the National Security Advisor, and they do research on a large number of issues and provide their assessment to the National Security Advisor. We also have a National Security Advisory Board. Earlier it used to be very big, very huge and sort of unmanageable, but today it is comprises of 9 members. The former Indian ambassador to Russia, P.S. Raghavan, he is currently the chairman. The members comprise of people who have specialization in different fields, in different areas. One of them is a specialist on Pakistan, which is an important issue. One of them is a specialist on relations with China. He is from the defense. He is a lieutenant general, and he has been posted in China. He speaks Chinese. There is another person who is a specialist on Afghanistan, because these are all important areas for India's foreign policy. So they also do research work. They really act as a think tank of the government, within the government, and they do studies. They do not have any executive power. They do not have any executive authority. As the name suggests, it's an advisory board, and it advises the government on what are the pros and cons of different issues. For instance, on artificial intelligence, on 5G, on data security and privacy, on all these new aspects of new technology. They will be able to advise the government on what possibly its position should be, what its policies should be. Then the Parliament also has an important role to play. The Parliamentary Standing Committee, there is currently Mr. P.P. Chaudhary. He is the chairperson of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs. It has 31 members, 22 from Lok Sabha and 9 from Rajya Sabha. They meet periodically, they meet regularly, and they will discuss different issues as far as foreign policy matters are concerned. For instance, relations with China, what is happening on the border, what should we do, relations with the United States, relations with Russia, and then they will provide their recommendations to the government, to the Ministry of External Affairs. There are other parliamentary standing committees also on defense, on commerce, on science and technology, on finance. They also play an important role in formulating the foreign policy of the country. I think we also need to keep in mind that the ministries dealing with these issues, for instance, defense, commerce, science and technology, they all also have a role to play. And others, like for instance, water resources, when we are discussing our relations with Bangladesh, then of course water resources, Ministry of Water Resources becomes very important. So different line ministries also have an important role to play in our relations with different countries, and the parliamentary standing committees also will come in. So there it will have to be, when we are discussing matters which relate to different countries, as I said, as far as water sharing of river waters is concerned with Bangladesh, then it will have to be a whole of the government approach that will need to be undertaken. There are also a large number of think tanks, and they have research scholars, they organize seminars, they organize different conferences within the country and outside the country, and they provide their own thoughts, their own ideas. Some of these think tanks are supported by the government, some others are private sector think tanks, so they can have their own, have a very significant role to play. Some of them will have their own thoughts, will have their own ideas on which way the government should be going. So we are able to, the government is able to get ideas from a variety of sources. One of the most important of this is the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. This was established in the 1960s. It is supported by the Ministry of Defense of the Government of India. There is the Indian Council of World Affairs. This is supported by the Ministry of External Affairs. They have considerable degree of autonomy, but they are supported and funded by different arms of the government. Observer Research Foundation is a private sector think tank, but it also, for specific projects, it receives a number of grants from the government. It organizes several programs for the government, works in very close coordination with the government. We also have the Vivekanand International Foundation. That also is focusing on a number of areas. All these four think tanks are based in Delhi. Recently, about 10 years ago, we had the Gateway House, which has appeared in Mumbai. This is supported and funded by the private sector, and basically, of course, it looks also at foreign policy issues, at strategic issues, but basically it focuses much more on economic and commercial matters. For instance, recently you would have seen that India decided not to join the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. So Gateway House and of course some of the others, because this was a very, very important decision that the government took, which the Prime Minister announced at the East Asia Summit in Bangkok in November 2019. But Gateway House and all the other think tanks would also be focusing on it and looking at it very, very carefully. Then there is the research and information systems, which speaks about cooperation amongst developing countries. Its role has increased very significantly, whether it is issues related to G20, the Group of 20, which was formed in 2009 after the international economic crisis. So research and information systems looks basically at all economic issues and takes them forward. We have the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, that is ICRIAR. That also plays a very important role in functioning, in working on economic issues that the government has to deal with, that government has to handle. And they also publish their papers, publish their recommendations, publish their advice, and of course provide it to the government so that when the government is formulating its own policy, then it can keep all these aspects in mind. In addition to this, there are a large number of other private think tanks. The government, either through IDSA or ICWA, it supports many of these think tanks and encourages them to carry out independent research and share its research with the government for its information and for formulation of policy. There are a number of other educational institutions also which have a role to play in this. It is in Jawaharlal Nehru University, the School of International Studies, that is the most preeminent institution which is working on this. And again, it deals with a large number of areas where India has interest. India's relations are strong, including Africa, Latin America, Central Asia, of course, the neighborhood, and US and other countries. Delhi University also has a very well developed, a very old department handling foreign policy issues. Mumbai University also, in its Department of International Relations, Department of Political Science, there are a number of different units dealing with relations with other countries. Calcutta University is also a very well known and a very well respected university. Jadavpur University also in Kolkata, so there also it is an important university, good research being conducted. Rajasthan University has also come up in recent years. Pondicherry University is doing good work. Goa University also, particularly on maritime issues. Then there are a number of think tanks related to these to the different services like CAPS, the Center for Air Power Studies. They deal with issues related particularly to Air Force and security matters in those. But as far as universities are concerned, many universities, in addition to the ones that I have mentioned, whether it is Kerala University, whether it is Madurai University, it is Chennai University, there are a large number of universities all over the country. Kashmir University, they are all doing, Lucknow University, they are all doing excellent work. Hyderabad University, they are doing excellent work in creating a young crop of experts in international relations, in foreign policy, and so that when they grow up, there can be informed debate as far as foreign policy matters are concerned. Media has also emerged as a very important instrument, as a very important way of getting the views of the people, of the common citizens, to the government in taking it forward, so that the government is able to get thoughts and ideas from a 360-degree spectrum. So number of print media, for instance, the Times of India, Hindustan Times, Indian Express, and others. Most of them have their own foreign policy correspondents, those who are experts in this area, and they follow, they observe what is happening in the world very, very closely, and they work accordingly and write very prolifically and profusely in all these areas. In Hindi newspapers, there's Hindustan, there is now Bharat Times, there's Dainik Bhaskar, and several others who are doing good work. The economic publications, Business Standard, Mint, Economic Times, the Chambers of Commerce and Industry also play a very important role. In terms of TV channels, CNN, News 18, India Today, Times Now, Republic TV, there are many of them who have very committed discussions and debates on foreign policy issues. On Hindi TV channels, there's Aaj Tak, News 24, TV9 Bharatvash, and several others. In these days of increased penetration of technology, social media has also has started playing an increasing role in carving and forming the foreign policy of the country. So to the final few words, there are a large number of stakeholders, there are a large number of actors, there are a large number of players in terms of formulating the foreign policy of the country. But of course, it is the official organs like the Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Commerce, Prime Minister's office, and the Prime Minister himself who play the most important role in formulating and in implementing the foreign policy of India. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation and have benefited from it. Thank you.